What separates a great story from a good one? In this video, I want to share a powerful technique called the Angel's Cocktail to take your storytelling skills to the next level. A few years ago, I came across a TED Talk by David Phillips on the topic of storytelling. To this day, it has been one of the most influential videos I've seen on the topic and something I personally tried to incorporate into my own content via what David calls the Angel's Cocktail. In short, the Angel's Cocktail are three hormones: dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins that when induced into someone's brain creates a magical feeling and, consequently, a great story. In the next few minutes, I'll do a short demonstration of how each of these hormones feel. Let's start with dopamine. To do that, I'll share one of my dating stories. A few years back, I was single and ready to mingle. I was using a few of the dating apps, Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. They all have their pros and cons, but I definitely like Hinge the most. One night, one of my buddies hosted a dinner for the guys just to relax and chill, and of course, dating came up. The most interesting part of the night was when I shared some details about a first date that I had the very next day and how this particular girl had an interest in fried chicken. Her love for fried chicken was literally all over her profile on Hinge. Let's call this girl Sophia, which isn't her real name, of course. Upon hearing that, my buddy was like, "Hey, is her name Sophia?" I was like, "Yeah, it is. What a small world. Have you guys dated?" He nods and goes on to describe his experience on a previous date with her. It was also a first date, but it was also the worst date he has had since moving here a year ago. Fast forward to tomorrow, and my mind is going in all sorts of directions as I'm curious if I'll have the same negative experience as my friend. I walk into the fried chicken restaurant, sit down, and anxiously await as I show up a few minutes early. Moments later, I see her walking towards me. She says hi, gives me a hug, and we both sit down. Next thing you know, would you like to know the rest of that story and how the date went? Well, I'll intentionally stop here as you'll likely already have increased levels of dopamine in your body. You are probably more focused on the story, interested in what happens next, and in your own mind, formulating what will likely happen, and probably felt good overall. That's what dopamine does. To create it, you simply introduce suspense and cliffhangers so your audience is always curious about what happens next. The next hormone I want to introduce you to is oxytocin. It makes you more generous, builds trust between us, and makes you bond to me. Are you ready? All right, so it goes something like this. Digoxin is a medication that is often prescribed for heart failure. It reduces mortality and hospitalization in patients that take it, and they typically take it once a day. As pharmacists, we know this, but patients often don't. That's why education and counseling is such a large part of our roles. One day, 2 years into pharmacy school, I get a call from my grandma. She tells me about how she continues to have trouble breathing. She has heart failure and was prescribed digoxin about a year ago. I inquired a bit about her symptoms, and she said, every single time I have trouble breathing, I'll take digoxin. Confused, I asked, what about when, it's not difficult to breathe? Are you still taking it? No, only when it hurts, she replied. Although a bit controversial, taking digoxin only as needed made me suspect that it likely didn't help her symptoms, and if anything, worsened her heart failure and caused permanent damage to her heart. I've had a lot of failures in life, but not recognizing she was taking her medications incorrectly for almost a year is probably one of my worst and something I've always been ashamed of. Because of that incident, I made a promise to myself later that evening that I'll never make the same mistake again. My inability to help my grandma that year largely influenced my current work ethic and my desire to help as many others as possible. So right now, you likely have some oxytocin in your body. You probably feel relaxed, more trusting, and a bit more connected to me. Being very open and authentic in my content is a big part of my identity as a creator, but it also helps me heal when I talk about it. To induce oxytocin, you simply need to create empathy. The last hormone is endorphins. It can create a sense of euphoria that can improve mood. Now, to illustrate this, I want to share a story about my experience collecting a medication history from a patient during my 4th year rotations as a pharmacy student. Although I've been on a few rotations already, I was still learning the ropes in hospital settings. As I walked into the patient's room to collect their medication history, I quickly noticed the curtains that surrounded his bed. Even though I've seen these curtains plenty of times, I've never actually seen them in use. Confused, I walked back to my preceptor and asked, why the curtains may be up. He looked at me and nonchalantly replied, "They are probably on the commode." I had no idea what a commode was and didn't want to appear stupid, so I just nodded and was like, gotcha. I walked back to the patient's room, which was shared by another patient in the corner that was actively being attended to by a nurse, and called out, "Hi, Mr. Bob, are you there?" Bob responds, "I'm right here." Reassured by his calm voice, I figured I'd take it upon myself to open the curtain. Since these were floor-to-ceiling curtains, I used both hands to grip it and with all my might, pulled it open. Immediately, I understood what a commode was as I saw Mr. Bob sitting in the corner, in the commode, aka the toilet, the look of shock and horror on both his face and mine, while simultaneously hearing laughter from the opposite side of the room where the other patient and nurse was. Of course, I apologized, closed the curtain, and walked out, never to return given how embarrassed and mortified both the patient and myself were. Right now, I imagine some of you are smiling or laughing because you now have some endorphins in your body. And to create them, you want to make people laugh. Again, these 3 hormones are collectively dubbed the angel's cocktail. And if you incorporate them into your storytelling, I firmly believe that you'll turn your good stories to great ones. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.
People knew her by her